Greetings all, I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. If you didn't see it, check out my podcast I did for Thanksgiving Day, including my 5 favorite things from every Final Fantasy I've played. Yes, every one. Now, it's time for some action-packed chaotic scenes as we compare a new threat and the mercenaries' version of the Pillar Assault. Starting off as usual with Gallagher's version, A New Threat. First off, we get the chilling conversation between the Shinra staff, as per the game. Shinra brings up that these are the remnants of Avalanche, further tying it in with the compilation, and adding a more personal touch to the scene. The fact that we now know that they've had dealings in the past, and, there's a blown-up reactor they have to revenge here, it's at least making the drastic actions a little bit more sensible, at least in Shinra's mindset. We kind of get the thought process. I mean, still evil as hell, but at least there's some sensible rationale to it. Also, one random thing, Heidegger says, you know fine well. Must be a regional thing, because that threw me for a loop. I mean, I've heard full well and damn well, but never fine well before, so interesting. I think it's just a regional thing, so if you know better, please let me know. I've never heard that before. I always share Gallagher's descriptions in this, but that doesn't mean to imply that he cannot write some effective-as-hell dialogue. Now, I want you to watch the subtle character interactions during this quote. Now, this quote here is going to be from page 111 and 112. You know exactly why we can't afford to allow any remnants of Avalanche to linger, replied President Shinra coldly. What's wrong? You want out? No, sir, it's just, mumbled Reeve. Sir, I'm sure you're aware that I was one of the architects of this city, and it feels very personal to me. Now, as head of the Urban Development Department, I'm involved in the running of Midgar. That's why... Reeve, you should flush your personal problems in the morning, scoffed Heidegger, his sneering eyes narrowing beneath the long scar that marred the right side of his face. The mayor's against this anyway, Reeve retorted, glaring furiously at his counterpart. Domino? Snorted Heidegger. He just sits in the building all day reading in the library and feeding his face. You call that a mayor? You know fine well the city council don't have any authority in these matters. That's enough, interrupted the president, his tone assertive. Then if you'll excuse me, sir, said Heidegger, stuffing the folder he carried into the arms of Reeve and saluting his superior, I must finish making the final arrangement. Very well. Dismissed. That man, growled Reeve through his clenched teeth, watching Heidegger as he disappeared from sight. You're tired, sighed the president, placing his hand on the shoulder. Why don't you go take a couple of days off and go somewhere? I can organize a flight to Costa del Sol for you, if you'd like. My wife tells me the weather is great at the moment. I'll think about it, he muttered, trudging towards the eastern stairwell. Saying nothing further, President Shinra walked slowly back to his desk, unable to stop the thin smile spreading over his lips. We'll tear down Sector 7 and report that Avalanche did it, he mused, slumping into his padded throne. Then we'll send in the rescue operation courtesy of Shinra Inc. and declare that our war against terrorism is finally over. This is perfect. I particularly like the commentary there at the end of that scene. I dare say Shinra is the type of guy who would hang a Mission Accomplished banner over the ruined Sector 7 plate. So, we return to our heroes with Cloud gagging. Wait, I thought we left the sex dungeon. Forgive that joke, it's a remnant of the previous part. So there is a moment of temporary despair from Tifa before Aerith tells her to basically suck it up, and she's like, okay, fine, I won't give up. This happens in both versions, actually. Presumably, Aerith rolled a natural 20 on her persuasion check. And she also snaps at Cloud, too, in Gallagher's version. Aerith wins some I got this shit points during this chapter. Now, I really do like that Gallagher points out something that game players might have missed. I mean, the sewer area is 2 screens long, but in real life, it's a freaking sewer. So, basically the slums, but wetter. There's no directional markers. People aren't meant to be traveling down here. So yeah, of course they would get disoriented. It's these wonderful additional bits that add some depth to the world. Now, there's a subtle line during this scene. You might miss it casually reading it, but I caught it, and I lost my shit at it. Cloud was volunteered to help the girls clamber over the top of the railings. Now, you see, the keyword here is was, and I think it speaks volumes. You see, Cloud volunteered to help just means that Cloud's being chivalrous and would go on without note. But Cloud was volunteered basically plants an entire scene in our head with 3 words involving, presumably, Aerith, telling him that if he wanted to help so badly, he should just hoist them up. And I feel like anybody who's been in a long-term relationship can identify with that sentiment. You either volunteer or you are volunteered. Now, interestingly, Gallagher spends about 2 paragraphs on the train graveyard before they get to the Seventh Heaven bar. I mean, I wasn't expecting him to do the whole moving the train puzzle, but it's interesting that he chose to focus more on the sewers. They wander around for a page and a half in the sewers, a disoriented, hopeless mess. But the second they are above ground, the action resumes full force. Tifa knows where they are, and the pacing picks up. I see why he chose to do it, and I appreciate it. So, first off, they sensibly stop by the Seventh Heaven first to check on their friend, which is 100% sensible, and it's completely realistic. I seem to recall the game railroading you to the pillar first, and maybe I'm wrong, but either way, I love that Gallagher had them do this first, because frankly, if it's a choice between trying to fight the entire army of a megacorp on a steel death trap, or making like a cactar and fleeing, I'm all aboard the GTFO train. But no, Gallagher reinforces the point that they're on the pillar and that the only option now is to fight. And while we're at it, let's take a look at some of the description of the chaos of the pillar. This is a quote from page 117. A sharp twang of metal rang out from high above them, as bullets ricocheted off the steel frame of the structure, the noise reaching their ears for the first time. A narrow staircase climbed the circumference of the erection, the limp bodies of Shinra soldiers lying bent and broken at regular intervals. As Cloud clambered through the hole in the fence, and into the enclosure, dashing towards the steps, the sound of thunder continued to reverberate all around. "What the hell is that?" shouted Tifa as she fought to keep up with him. "Rifle shots," answered Cloud, staring up the stairwell, taking 2 at a time. "I'd know the sound of the army's guns anywhere. Come on, the others need our help." The battle grew louder as they gained in height, the shrieking rotation of Barrett's gun arms adding to the chorus of bullets. The faster Cloud ran, the more difficult he found it to avoid the corpses of infantrymen, once misjudged his jump over a woman and stumbling onto the stairs in his frantic attempt to reach the summit. As he veered around a corner of the staircase, galloping up the 10th flight, he heard Tifa call out from behind him. Twisting his body as he moved, he saw her kneel over the figure of a young boy, the bandana around his forehead unmistakable. Biggs. We go up the pillar with each tragic death occurring as it does. In particular, Jesse's death was handled very well, but I just gave you a long quote, so I'll leave it at that. When they finally do reach the top, there's just a hailstorm of bullets awaiting them. And for such a relatively short moment, before Gallagher has Reno show up, he really lets the panic of the situation simmer. I mean, you can practically feel the bullets whipping by you. So, Reno shows up, and he arms the emergency plate system release. Just a side note here, I totally love this concept in the game. I love talking to some architect and asking him what the circumstances would be where this would be required. What emergency situation could require you to cause one section of the city to crumble onto another? I mean, they may as well just label the thing, "Push this button to recreate the ending of Mousetrap." So there's a fight scene with Reno, as per the expected. Gallagher's action chops are certainly no slouch, but the fight pales in comparison to what happens next. When Sung shows up, we get some more compilation tie-ins, and just a really good scene in general. This quote is from page 123. Sung, the chief of the Turks, glared in disgust upon the party with a manner of superiority, only for his brows to furrow as his eyes met Cloud's. The momentary flash of confusion was barely detectable. The two had participated in an assignment together many years earlier to the remote Modeo region in the north. but they had not interacted before or since then. His lengthy black hair wavered around his spine in the strong gusts, blown back from the unmistakable forehead that bore his birthmark spot above his nose. Although only in his late 20s, Sung was widely known throughout the Shinra Corporation as the brains behind the Turks. Within his cool exterior lurked an uncompromising and ruthless personality, and a fierce loyalty to the company, having learned his trade through his mentor, the great Veld. Sung was now the unwilling lapdog of the head of the public safety maintenance, Director Heidegger, but still commanded much respect from all those whom he worked with. So the chapter wraps up as you would expect. Chat with Aerith, get slapped, bomb goes off, etc. One thing I did like here, again, it's a subtle touch, is that they were swinging to freedom, and Cloud notices that a few people are just standing there, watching the explosions happen. And it's completely true to life. It's like some people who have lived under the plate their entire life might not understand the significance of that, not even because they're ignorant of what it exactly does. I mean, I think most people can get pillars holding it up, but just the idea that all of a sudden, the thing that's been above you, in some cases your entire life, is now no longer going to be there. The fact, it's basically like telling somebody the sky is falling. Like, nobody could believe that. So, I like that. It's a nice human touch. And it's something that, it's one sentence. He could have not written it at all. But he threw it in, and it adds a human connection that scene would have otherwise lost. Well, that was morbid as hell. What a great way to end this part, huh? Let's move over to The Mercenary. So we're picking up in The Mercenary at chapter 20, and the first thing to mention is William's use of the names of most of the Shinra executives are their surnames, which isn't such a bad thing in its own merits. It's interesting that some of the given names he chooses for them, though, are kind of off the wall. For instance, Heidegger is not Heidegger's first name in his version, it's Armand Heidegger, and Cathal Shinra. In fact, in the original draft of this book, written before, presumably, Dirge of Cerberus came out as Reeve was dubbed, I think it was Alexander Reeve by Williams, if I'm remembering that correctly. Let me go ahead here. So first off, heads up, Williams' next two chapters, they're really short, and they cover the same amount of content. So, as an excuse here to have a bit less in the way of quotes from his version, allow me to play an excerpt from that interview I mentioned in a previous part, where I had with him, where he talks about his naming conventions here. Going back to weird names, I noticed that you give first names to the executives who I don't think we have a canonic first name, except for Reeve. Amron, Andretta, Yaphet, these are more fantasy-ish, and I know you said FF7 doesn't really have a naming convention. What made you pick these names out?
I don't know, honestly. They were some of the first names I made. But I just, first of all, when I noticed basically that the first time I saw Heidegger, because that's the last name of a famous German philosopher and Nazi sympathizer, and Reeve is a title, a medieval title given to the overseer of a village or a town, who is usually appointed by a baron or someone.
Shire Reeve, which later became sheriff.
Yes, indeed. And so when the first scene at Shinra headquarters, when Shinra's saying Heidegger and Reeve and they're calling him President Shinra, I just assumed that they were the last names of the council. Which made Scarlet a little frustrating, because Scarlet is a first name, but that's patriarchy. And usually, also in RPGs, villains are usually called by their last names, heroes by their first, which might explain why Reeve was turned into a first name in the sequels and prequels. But I don't like that. I kind of eschew the compilation in favor of, I think, what my idea of the original intention of the canon was. So I basically just threw on first names. I tried to come from a variety of sources. Yaphet is a Hebrew name. Armin is German. Andretta, I think, is, I don't remember the origin, but I think I just took a name from a bunch of different naming origins on Earth. So
something that I do like is some foreshadowing of Heidegger's. Williams describes him as having earned every medal except for the aforementioned twin stars, which means he had yet to die in battle. Now, I don't know if that was intentional foreshadowing, but it's brilliant if it was. Would that be a Chekhov's medal? In general, this opening scene is expanded quite nicely to include some additional tension between Heidegger and Reeve. Let me read you some. This is from page 161. It was Reeve, he realized with dread. The lout. What business could he have here? Heidegger could imagine a great number of whining protestations from the head of urban development. Heidegger, the president addressed him, and his voice rang off the floors and pillars. How are the preparations coming? Heidegger let out a hearty laugh. Smoothly, very smoothly. I've assigned the Turks to this. Assigned? Reeve asked. I didn't know that the Turks were in the habit of taking orders from executives. People take orders from their superiors, Heidegger replied. You would do well to remember that. Reeve didn't seem bothered by this slight. Mr. President, is it too late to stop this? What's the matter? Shinra asked. You want out? Reeve thought. No, he said. Forgive my boldness, but it's my job to be concerned with the welfare of the city. The city's under attack, Heidegger cut in. Outside the wall of the windows, Reactor 1 still fumed from Thursday's explosion. Or have you forgotten? I haven't, Reeve said, but I have a hard time remembering who was attacking it. Heidegger laughed again, the laugh that galvanized his troops and set fear into the hearts of his enemies. Reeve, you should really flush those personal problems in the morning. Reeve turned a sick shade of purple. The mayor is against... Who, Domino? Heidegger interrupted. He sits in this building all day feeding his face, and you still call him mayor? I believe Ronson's has a sale on beard trimmers, Reeve commented. Stop, Shinra intervened. I just like that cattiness and that back and forth between them. It's completely his own creation, but I like it. Apart from the flushing the personal problems line. So, I gotta say one last thing about the scene before we move on. There is a chilling line added by Williams where Reeve demands that the people be evacuated because they will die. Seems a bit silly because he kind of knows where this is going, but okay. Now we can definitely draw a comparison to modern-day atrocities here. Heidegger states clearly that the thousands of slumlings will die, but they're not really people, which continues along the vein of the scarily true-to-life evil that litters Williams' books. I mean, this is real-life horrific bigotry, though admittedly the scene is a touch heavy-handed, but hey, I like it, it's effective. Funnily enough, when we get back to Cloud, he's also choking on water, although Williams didn't use the term gagging, so I couldn't make a kink pun, and I'm not really eager to try and reach for one now. Water sports, maybe? Whatever. But, seriously, the first sentence of both books for this section, and they both mention that. It's just a kind of funny parallel. Williams also spends a lot of time in the sewers, adding an interesting element here. I think it's cool, first off, that both authors understood that the sewers is where you're going to have your slowdown moment before you get on top and go into the action. That's nice, but the way Williams does it is kind of interesting and kind of unique. The sewers here, first off, are pitch dark, but Cloud has night vision, one of his soldier abilities. Gotta say, it could have used a little explanation. It seems a little Deus Ex Machina, but whatever. We've had worse in the game. There's magic. I'm gonna roll with it. Also, I should mention that this whole scene is very inspired by the Rancor scene from Return of the Jedi, because the Don and his men are upstairs watching them on cameras pointed down in the sewers. That totally seems like something the Don would do. I'm totally on board with that. But you just said the sewers were completely dark. Maybe they're infrared cameras, but I don't know. It's a nice touch. So, Tifa makes a torch from a fire spell, which she sends down the tunnels to reveal Apps, who does make an appearance in the Williams version. Despite my complaint about the night vision earlier, this creates one hell of an effective combat scene. It's such a great combat scenario. They're fighting in the dark, with flashes of the beast's image appearing amidst the flames of Tifa's fire, finally ending in Cloud noticing that the creature is chained to the wall, and the three of them decide to run to safety. I am totally okay with this course of action, and it's really effective at turning what could have been just a bog-standard combat scenario into something memorable as hell. The imagery alone is worth a mention, so let me read you some of that. This is from page 164. From the darkness, a slow rumble shuddered into a roar. A burst of fire cast a blinding light on Tifa and the beast. The flames danced across the creature's skin, incinerating long patches of algae. As the fires went out, she reared back to kick at its knees. Soon the darkness swallowed them again. Tifa grunted within the black, and Cloud heard something else. Distantly up the chute, somewhere in Don Corneo's manse, people were cheering. He ran forward into pure blackness. The splashing of boots behind them told him that Eris was coming too. He wanted to stop. Duck! He bent forward, his leg still flying. Something struck the back of his head, thick and slimy. Fire exploded all around them. Embers trailed past Cloud as he came up. The creature's long tail soared away from him. He felt his head, where it had connected. His hair was covered with slime. Only a graze, he laughed. He spotted a horn on the creature's back that would make a suitable handhold. He leapt, but the last of the embers died before he connected, drenching him in blindness. When he hit, he scrambled to hold on, but the beast was wet as a frog. He'd missed the horn. He slid off the monster, landing winded in the rushing water. The fight wraps up with Apps using its signature tidal wave move and smashing our heroes against the bar at the end of the tunnel. It's a nice use of an enemy's most memorable attack, and it isn't the last one in this section. Hint, hint. So, wrapping up Chapter 20, there's one last cute little line here. Cloud wants to go last on his way out of the tunnel to keep an eye on the girls, and Aerith comments that, what are you, some kind of pervert? Cloud even bothers to tell her that this is no time for banter. It's cute, and I know this is weird, and I brought this up last part, but I wonder if this isn't a reference to Zidane as well. Or maybe he's just making reference to the anime trope. I don't know. Either way, it's a cute scene. So, Chapter 21 begins with us rounding a corner and being right at the pillar. So, again, they basically skipped over the train graveyard. That's probably for the best. Like I say, it's completely understandable. You get above ground, you want the action to resume. It's sensible. It's a good way to write. But here's the thing. When we leave off Chapter 20, Williams describes the place, the train graveyard, as a labyrinth, and even Cloud has no idea what direction to head in. Then the next chapter starts and we're just through it just fine. Again, I want this to be mostly positive, but I would recommend maybe a slightly different description to make it seem less like you're setting up for something. The payoff here just felt a little bit weird. So, now here's the awkward bit about this review. Williams' chapter from here basically follows the same path of the pillar. The exact same content. We have him start off at the pillar, right? They don't go over to Seventh Heaven because, well, the fighting's clearly happening at the pillar. It makes the scene more tense because they don't get to freshen up. They don't get to grab their stuff and go. No, there's even mentions of them being partly declothed, wet, tired. Tifa injures her feet, stuff like this. I like this. Now, I know it sounds like I'm just being my usual both ways are good self again, but honestly, it could work either way here, depending upon the time frame and the stakes you set up. Gallagher's pace certainly isn't relaxed, but they have time to check the obvious first and get suited up. Williams' pace is more hectic. Everybody is clear as day already on the pillar and shit's going down, so you have to suck it up. There's better tension in Williams' version, because the stakes are a bit higher, but a bit more believable set of events occur within Gallagher's version. I mean, this could honestly describe a lot of dramas, I think. Real life is rarely as cinematic as our games, and sometimes being realistic results in a loss of tension. Conversely, something really cool and cinematic can be picked apart by even the tiniest application of logic. Did I mention I'm writing a Final Fantasy VIII novelization? So Jesse had actually brought along Cloud's sword, which is how he gets reunited with it in the Williams version. Seems a trifle convenient, but let's roll with it. Most of the rest of the chapter is, again, basically point for point. He takes the time to include the pyramid maneuver of Reno's. I told you another one was coming. And it's a nice touch, but it does seem a little bit cartoony. I mean, and again, I'm on board with it. It's a world with magic. It's okay. It's not bad writing. It's totally good. It's just still, even in the game, it's such a goofy attack. Oh man, stop playing Yu-Gi-Oh, Reno. Anyways, he also drops the formality of calling it an emergency plate system and just calls it what it is, a bomb. We see Williams dropping some of the original pretense of the book a touch. He decides to go for a bit more visceral and real. Again, I'm not saying there couldn't be a need for an emergency plate release. I'm just struggling to find out what it is. So the place goes boomy and our heroes escape, but chapter 21 ends with the conversation between Shinra and Reeve, just a small paragraph where he's told to go take a vacation as per the game, even ending the chapter with a reference to the opera that Shinra listens to as he watches Sector 7 plummet, which is still one of the most chilling moments in that game. It's just like, he doesn't give a fuck, he's just watching people die and listening to an opera. Wow. So, conclusion. What's the big message of this part? Well, I think as I hinted earlier, it's ultimately a lesson in creating believable tension. Do you prefer the faster pace of Williams' version, with some of the logical hiccups, or do you prefer Gallagher's more steady pace at the expense of some tension? Well, again, I think both can work, but you have to frame them right. I think both versions handled it well within the scope of their stories, but I do find myself gravitating more towards Gallagher's retelling. The idea being that they would, at least in the framing of Gallagher's story, try to evacuate their friends first, and only get into an unwinnable fight once they had no other option. But this is not to say that Williams' version is bad by any means. You will be on the edge of your seat for sure in his reading. Well, that wraps up part 7, my friends. Now let's move on to the Nibelheim Incident recap for this episode. Now, I haven't listened to Gallagher's behind-the-scenes podcast on these parts yet, so I won't have much inside info, and I apologize if I repeat points or make speculation in which is wrong. So, chapters 2 and 3. Let's start off with the opening paragraph of chapter 2 here, where we get the correct order of operations for persuasion: charm, chain of command, and finally threats of violence. I feel like this description is how 90% of interactions at Shinra take place. To be fair, Gallagher doesn't say it exactly went down this way, but I like to think that it followed chronologically. Say, you want to fly into this tempest? No. Okay, I'm ordering you to fly into this tempest. Eat a dick, ma'am. Sure thing, but first I'll need you to eat a bullet. Okay, jeez. We get a behind-the-scenes look of Shinra during this chapter, how it began some 40 years prior as a manufacturing concern, until they learned how to produce Mako energy. This also gives us crucial information about what exactly it is that goes on in these reactors. This is more of the Gallagher I'm used to, spelling stuff out for us so that new readers can get an idea of the stakes. I also do love the character of Heidi in this chapter, including where she just decides to say, fuck it, and skydive out of the chopper. We get little touches of her backstory and what made her the kind of devil-may-care person that she is. I found the inclusion of a Cessna aircraft kind of an interesting real-world comparison there, especially as a fan of John Grisham. That guy always finds a chapter in his books to talk about airplanes, by the way. Read The Summons, it's awesome. But seriously, Heidi just goes through hell here to complete her mission, getting knocked around and nearly killed in the attempted skydive, being veered off course, being stuck far away from her intended drop point, and she says, yep, but that's why I get paid the big bucks. Like, damn, I consider myself to be somebody with a good work ethic, but I wish I had this level of confidence. And wrapping up this chapter, we have Heidi unable to contact Command, who may very well assume she is dead. And as she's mulling this over, she begins to hear the first of the screams. As always, Gallagher knows how to write a hook. But we'll have to wait as Chapter 3 takes us back to Zack in the Sector 6 slums. I have to say, I really like the references to all the side missions that Zack does in Crisis Core, with a particular mention of the Crescent unit coming to mind. I actually enjoyed these missions. They were a nice intense because the harder Crescent unit members were actually really worthy opponents. When we finally get to Aerith, he assures her that he has to leave, but don't worry, he'll be back to Midgar in no time, at which point presumably the narrator said he would not be back. I mean, that's about as fate-tempting as you can possibly be, but then again, Zack was always kind of childishly optimistic. It's one of his most endearing qualities. A cute scene follows of them beginning their flower-selling operation, including a guy who spent all of his gil at the Honeybee Inn and runs away when pressured into buying a flower by Zack. It's a nice reference to Don Corneo and Wall Market in general, but I also really like this interaction between Aerith and Zack a lot. It's such an adorable scene to prime us for the shit that's about to go down. Like, we have more sales, and it's basically the best day ever trope. Naturally, Sung shows up to tell him that it's time to get a move on. We have this great scene of partial trust, partial suspicion between the two men. Zack chooses to go with his better nature and trusts Sung to watch out for Aerith. It's kind of ironic that this is the chapter I read during the comparison series part where Sung tries to kidnap and successfully does kidnap Aerith. I don't care, I'm not redoing. That is literally the last sentence. There's your blooper for the day. He did kidnap her. That's kind of the point. Anyway, that's all, folks. Next time, we will be comparing the retelling of Aerith's backstory by Elmira and dropping in on chapters 4 and 5 of the Nibelheim Incident. Next time I see you, it'll be Christmas time, so I'll have to find something snowy and cheery to do. Yeah. Need good Christmassy Final Fantasy music, huh? Peace.